Sleepy Hollow Season 4, Episode 8, Sick Burn. Really love this episode. I think, especially with the opening that they had, I didn't know what in the world was going on. I'm like, okay, this is very interesting. We have Dreyfus, for whatever reason, he has people singing, but he's sitting in front of the White House and he has Ichabod brought up to him, and he's got super long hair, he's got like a huge scar on his eye and stuff, and it was really crazy. I was like, holy crap, this is interesting. And he wakes up somehow he has these visions. It's very weird that he's having visions of the future, but he's having these visions of the future, and in this one, he was victorious, and I would assume everybody else was dead because they're not Ichabod. So it was really crazy. I'm like, how in the world do we get to this point and have the characters actively try to stop it? Like, how in the world does that remotely play out? And I love the way they did it, because we have in this episode Molly basically training with Jenny. And so she picks up the bowl, and it's like, okay, well, you picking up the bowl basically means that you're an oracle, which kind of means like you can see into the future. And so she starts messing with the bowl, and Jenny's like, be careful, because of course it seems like nothing. And it instantly knocks her out, and she sees the future and it was interesting. I couldn't tell if it was her seeing the future or being in the future, or kind of a mix of both, because of course when she actually touches Ichabod, it's like, can you hear me? He says her name when he turns around, so it's like, was she kind of jumping in the future, or like kind of projecting herself into the future, or is that going to be like a scene in an episode where things get that bad that she ends up finding him in this cave, like in a future episode where things are just that bad? Which I would assume if they do that, then things will have to get really, really dark to the point where he'd be captured. Because if I was right about that actual scene, when he's chained up, that's him in Sleepy Hollow. That's the old bunker. So for that to be the case, everyone else would kind of have to be dead, I would assume. So I don't think that was her actually in a future episode. I think it was like her projecting herself into the future. But still really cool. And I was like, okay, they don't touch on it just yet, but Dreyfus doesn't exactly know how his plans are going to play out either. But Jenny now has to be the one to tell the team, like, hey, she had this vision of the future, and, and this is something that we should probably worry about. And at this point, it's really hard to say what Jenny believes about it. Like, of course, it's her being an oracle, and the way she explained it, because I've known oracles, when I think oracles, I think being able to see into the future, but the way she explained it was like it was almost more like telepathy more than anything else. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I always thought oracles were, to see the future. That's what they're typically used for, and that's what happened in this episode. So it'll be interesting to see how she goes about this knowledge, where it's like, okay, she had this crazy vision of Ichabod being alone and stuff like that. Will she have to see it again? Like, will she have to be with Molly when she kind of goes into this crazy trance again? Or, what's going to happen to finally kind of kick them into gear, like, hey, something bad is actually going to happen. So, they kind of introduce it in this episode, but it still doesn't really go anywhere. It's just like a crazy vision that happened. It was just random. But at some point, things are going to get crazier. And who knows, maybe Ichabod will get the scar or something, and that'll just be a permanent thing. And it's like, that was in my vision, and then that's where it starts to unfold. But at this point, we have both sides knowing where the future leads, and unfortunately, it's leading more towards the immortal villain as the victor. So we'll see how that plays out, but that was very interesting. And then we also find out at the end that not only is Dreyfus in the future going to be like the victor, but he's also the victor because he's setting up like his own evil supernatural team, where he brings in this kid who was like a famous pop star. I would love to hear the backstory for how he ended up bringing in this kid who's just like a random pop star and making him one of the villains or whatever. But he brings him in, and the actor who played the kid, his name was Robbie K, I believe. I recognized him. I was like, I couldn't tell why I recognized him, but when I first saw him, he looked exactly like Tom Holland to me, and I was like, that can't be Tom Holland, because he's Spider-Man. He's not going to be in Sleepy Hollow. So I had to look it up, and he's the kid from Heroes Reborn, for anyone who may have seen that, and he was basically like the main character in that. So I was like, I knew I recognized this guy, but I kept thinking he was Tom Holland, which didn't make any sense, but they look a lot alike. I didn't notice that before until this episode. I'm like, that can't actually be him, but they look a lot alike. And I also didn't know that guy was British because he was doing an English accent in the other show. So there it is. But I like the way they did it, where he comes in and he's using this, basically this ancient scroll. He translates into modern times, and he just makes it into a video. And then all these people get cursed, and they're setting on fire, and they're exploding. And also, this is something I noticed. Every person that died before they got to like the actual monster killed someone else. There was always somebody trying to hold him back. That's how they kept showing people dying. Like every time somebody died, it was someone else holding them down, and that person would get killed too. I'm like, every time they die, they take somebody innocent with them. And that kind of seemed to be the thing with the episode, and they kind of go through that a little bit with Jake, where it's like, I could have held her back, and I could have ended this. Like, no, if you did that, it would have just sped up the curse, and it would have actually killed her. And it's like, that's what kept happening throughout the episode, and I feel like that's why they kept doing it that way. But I like the way it played out. I love the emotion in this episode. We get to see this really deep connection between these two friends who are just like the people who worked in this place, and they were just good buddies before, and now it's like they're stuck in like this actual supernatural war, and it's even more intense than it ever was before. And I love the emotion that they had in this episode, where he's freaking out about his best friend, and it's like, if anything happens, you save her, not me, stuff like that. And he's kind of taking initiative to like curse himself, because Ichabod had the same idea, and he's like, yeah, I already did that like 20 minutes ago, so this is what I have to do, because she would do the same for me. So I really love the way it played out. I really like the emotion to it, especially with them having been absent in the last episode. I was really excited that this episode actually focused so much on them, and I thought that was really great. And they go through the history books and stuff like that, and we find out that there was a former supernatural team of just tons of famous people, where we have like Uncle Sam and Davy Crockett and Sacagawea. And unfortunately, a man that I'm not as familiar with, so that's why I can't think of his name, but it's just like, I didn't know that Uncle Sam was based off an actual person. I just thought that was like an idea, which technically it is, because it's not that guy's face. But it was interesting. They have like the cool slow motion thing where they have their weapons and stuff. But I was like, that's cool. And, they talk about how they were the group that worked in that place before, and now Ichabod is the one who has to lead this new generation of a team, and hope that they can survive like they did in this episode. And it was very interesting, just going through that process of this team dynamic, and Molly getting closer to realizing her power as a witness, and Jenny trying to help her, and Ichabod being almost destined to fail a little bit. The whole team really kind of being destined to fail, but surviving through really crazy odds in this episode against the Jinn, which I thought was really cool. I kind of wish the Jinn had more of a fight. I think that would have been cool. It was, with more of the effects. I'm actually, oddly enough, because of video games, Uncharted 3, I'm familiar with Jinn, and their heads being on fire and stuff like that. I was like, oh, I'm actually familiar with those. So it was kind of cool, but sadly we didn't get like a super epic fight scene. But he did throw like a fireball, and then when they shot him and just like electrocuted him, I was like, huh, that's an interesting way to do that. I didn't think that it would work, but it like completely wiped him out. And fortunately, neither of our main characters died, because they were able to save Alex, because they stabbed him. And I was like, oh, because when she like just kind of shrugged it off, I was like, oh, I guess that didn't actually cure her like it was supposed to. But she kind of eventually came out of it, and so she ends up saving Jake, and everyone ends up fine, and they save the rest of the people as well. But I think it was a good episode, and I'm really excited to see where they're going now that they've given us like this really dystopian future where Dreyfus does end up winning. And the one thing that I thought was really interesting about that is that Dreyfus was by himself. I don't know if that means Job was off doing something, but that's something I noticed. I was like, okay, he's got, it's seemingly, his flag, he's at the White House and everything, it's his flag. Everything seems to be said and done, but he was by himself. Like, Job wasn't there, the kid wasn't there, none of that stuff. It was just like, it was Dreyfus all alone, and I was like, I don't know exactly what that means. Did he betray Job? Was Job, like I said, just possibly doing another mission? Resistance, outskirts, and all that sort of stuff. But it just interested me, like, he has ultimate power and everything, immortality, all this stuff, and yet he was still alone, just drinking tea. So it was just interesting during that scene. That was like one of the big things I noticed. I was like, why wasn't Job there? Like, this has been his right-hand man for decades now, since he made this deal, and yet he wasn't there in this all-powerful future. It was just Dreyfus, by himself. So that caught my attention for sure. But I'm excited where they're headed. I love this dark vision of the future. It's like, how are they going to stop this? it's always been like, all right, yeah, things are going to be bad for them. But it was always just an in the moment. This, I'm pretty sure, is the first time they've ever done an actual like leap into the future. They've done tons of stuff into the past, but this is like just both sides now have visions of the future, and it's not good for the hero. So I'm actually really excited for that. I want to see like little glimpses of this dystopian future, and maybe we do see that the other characters are alive and they're kept in other places and stuff, and they all look disheveled and things like that. I would love to see how that plays out, and it's years in the future as well. So that was another thing, because they mentioned, or Molly specifically at the end mentions like, oh, Ichabod looks so old, like he was much older. So it is like years and years into the future where that's supposed to happen, but obviously it still has to start, during this season because they've introduced the idea. So those concepts of how Dreyfus becomes all powerful do have to begin in this episode, and they kind of touch on that because they have the flag at the end of the episode with like the cubed infinity sign, which admittedly I think looks really, really cool. But I'm excited to see where they're headed. I really enjoyed this episode, not just for the visions, but admittedly that was probably my favorite part, just because it's like, man, they've never done anything like that. And it was just, it's not even just like, oh, he's just a powerful villain. He's an immortal villain with a super powerful sidekick. Like Job himself could probably be a main villain as a powerful demon, but Dreyfus is the main villain who's immortal. So there's just a lot to it, and I think that's why that excited me more than anything else. But I love what they did with the main story in this episode, what they learned about the past, and the former supernatural team that helped save the planet and stuff like that. They definitely did some really cool stuff. But those visions of the future, that's what got me excited the most, just for what we're gonna see for the rest of this season. And I'm curious if how far that's gonna go along, because with Dreyfus being immortal, at this point, personally, I wouldn't hate it if he stayed as the main villain. That's a little weird, but they've always done weird stuff where it's like they'll kill villains in like the middle of the season type stuff. So I think this is probably one of the few villains that could survive as a main villain, because even the Headless Horseman was like the main villain for the first season, but after that, the Moloch stuff happened, and the Headless Horseman was kind of like a side villain. He was still there like quite a lot, but he technically wasn't the main villain anymore. He was just there in episodes and the whole stuff with Katrina and all that stuff. So I think Dreyfus is the main villain for 2 full seasons. Could easily work, especially with the whole immortality thing. But very excited to see where they're headed, of course. I would love to know what you guys thought about this episode, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, least favorite parts. And I actually want to know how you guys do think they'll end up stopping Dreyfus, because now that they've shown us this crazy glimpse of the future where he has ultimate control, and we see at the end of the episode, it's not just Dreyfus and Job. He has his own character who even mentions, like, I feel more powerful. Basically, he was gaining power from all those other people dying, so who knows what he's going to be able to do in future episodes. So he's building his own, supervillain team to go against the heroes, and he's already seen the future where he's won. So I would love to know how you guys think they're going to actually find a way to stop this future from happening, because at this point, we've only gotten a glimpse of it, and it's like, yeah, they don't really know what it's even going to happen for sure, outside of this little vision Molly had. So there's a lot of possibilities. I'm sure they'll win, just because, that would just be a devastating end to the series if the villains won, and that's just how it goes. But we'd love to know your predictions or just theories and everything on how they'll end up beating Dreyfus. And of course, I want to know what you guys thought about this episode in general, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.